The neighborhood always looked like something out of a brochure. Manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, identical houses with just enough variation to feign uniqueness. The HOA sent out monthly newsletters, boasting about community spirit, neighborhood watch successes, and quarterly landscaping achievements. But beneath the polished surface, something ugly brewed, a tension you could only sense if you lived here long enough. We used to joke about the HOA mafia, those few board members and self-appointed enforcers who wielded their clipboard authority like a badge. They weren't security guards by training or employment, just volunteers with time, entitlement, and an unsettling sense of power. The worst of them started patrolling the streets with walkie-talkies and tactical vests, acting like they were safeguarding the White House instead of a cul-de-sac filled with retirees and families. It wasn't always like this. When we moved in 6 years ago, the neighborhood was peaceful. Quiet enough for weekend BBQs, summer lemonade stands, and kids riding their bikes until sunset. But over time, small things changed. More rules, more surveillance, more reports of aggressive behavior by the so-called security volunteers. We tried to brush it off, convinced ourselves it was just an overzealous attempt at community safety. But it became harder to ignore when newcomers were interrogated at the gate or when friends who didn't look the part were followed around by golf carts with flashing lights. I kept my concerns mostly to myself. What could I do? File a complaint? To whom? The same people empowering these men? My wife and I did our best to stay off the radar. We waved politely, paid our dues, and avoided drawing attention. But that changed the day our daughter came to visit. I remember how proud I was to tell the neighbors about her career, though most didn't listen. Ava was a federal agent, not just an agent, an FBI tactical commander. Years of high-risk operations, hostage rescues, counter-terrorism missions. She was the calmest person I knew in a storm. So when she called me that afternoon, voice steady but clipped, and said, "Dad, I need you to come to the gate. One of your HOA security guys just pulled a gun on me." I knew two things instantly. First, someone had made a catastrophic mistake. And second, that neighborhood's fragile illusion of order was about to come crashing down. Ava never needed to announce her presence to command a room. She just had that kind of energy, the kind that made people straighten their backs and choose their words more carefully. Even as a child, she was sharper than most adults, always asking questions that cut to the core of things. She was never content with surface-level answers, and that trait, though exhausting at times, was exactly what made her such a force in the world she chose. By the time she was in high school, we knew she wasn't meant for anything ordinary. While her classmates were still figuring themselves out, Ava was already talking about justice, accountability, and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. We were stunned, but not surprised when she joined the FBI. She never did anything halfway. The training broke most people, but Ava thrived under pressure. Tactical operations, field missions, hostage negotiation. She didn't just do the job, she mastered it. Promotions followed, and eventually she was given command of a tactical unit known for taking on missions that most would never walk into. She wasn't just brave, she was calculated, focused, and deeply committed to the people under her command. Her team would have followed her into fire, and they had, more than once. But what most people missed, what the HOA security officer never saw, was that Ava was also kind. Her strength wasn't loud or performative. It was built on discipline and quiet certainty. When she came home to visit, she didn't flaunt her credentials or carry herself like she was above anyone. She helped her mum in the kitchen, told bad jokes at the dinner table, and sat on the porch with me talking about things that had nothing to do with federal operations. She'd ask about the neighbors, the garden, and that leaky pipe I kept saying I'd fix. That day, she wasn't wearing a uniform or a badge. She was dressed in jeans, boots, and a grey t-shirt, driving her SUV with an overnight bag in the back seat and a pie she'd promised to bring for dinner. She hadn't come as an agent. She came as our daughter, someone trying to enjoy a quiet weekend at home. But when power is given to the wrong people, they don't look for threats, they manufacture them. And that's exactly what happened when a man with no training and too much pride looked at Ava and decided she didn't belong. The sun had just begun to dip behind the roofs when Ava pulled up to the entrance of our gated community. The neighborhood always looked a little too proud of itself, especially at dusk, when the golden hour light made every picket fence and flower bed seem like part of a carefully curated illusion. Ava rolled her window down at the guardhouse, fully expecting the usual keypad interaction, or maybe a quick nod from someone scanning her license plate. Instead, a man stepped out from the booth in a tactical vest, 2 sizes too large, and a baseball cap that read "Security" in bold, white letters. He didn't look old, maybe mid-30s, but something about the way he squared his shoulders and rested his hand on his belt gave away his need to be in control. Not professional, just eager. He leaned into her window and barked, "Name and address." Ava remained calm. "I'm here to visit my parents, Thomas and Rachel Moore. They live at 483 Palmetto Drive." He narrowed his eyes. "ID?" She reached into her wallet and handed him her driver's license. He barely looked at it. "What's your business here again?" "Visiting? I'm their daughter." The man looked over her SUV slowly, suspiciously, like he was trying to make a profile fit a story he'd already invented. "You're not on the approved guest list." "I've been here dozens of times," she replied evenly. "They probably didn't update it. If you call them, they'll confirm it." He didn't move, just stood there staring, then said, "I don't need to call anyone. You'll need to turn around." She frowned. "Sir, I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to visit my parents. Can you please let me through or confirm with them directly?" Instead of responding, he stepped in front of her vehicle, now blocking her path with his body. "This is private property. You need to leave." Ava took a breath. She was still polite, but I could imagine the shift in her posture. Calm, but alert. "I'm asking you again to call them. This will take less than a minute." The man's voice rose. "You're refusing a lawful command. Step out of the vehicle." "That's not a lawful command," she said, her tone flat now. It was then he placed his hand on his hip, where the holster sat. It was supposed to be a deterrent, a prop. But he unclipped the latch. She saw it, registered the danger immediately. She didn't reach for hers. She didn't move at all. "I'm asking you one last time," he said, voice cracking from a mix of adrenaline and imagined authority. That's when Ava knew. This wasn't going to de-escalate on its own. He wasn't protecting anyone. He was provoking something he couldn't possibly understand. And she was about to show him the difference between pretending to have power and actually having it. The moment his fingers brushed the grip of the gun, Ava's instincts shifted into overdrive. Her breathing slowed, her focus narrowed. This wasn't new territory for her. She'd faced down armed men in war zones, cleared rooms under fire, led raids where a single mistake meant someone didn't go home. But this felt different, not because the threat was greater, but because it was so absurd. A neighborhood rent-a-cop, likely high on HOA self-importance, was treating a family visit like a national emergency. And now he had a gun halfway out of its holster. She didn't move. Not yet. Movement could be misread. She watched his face, his posture. He was uncertain, jittery, like a child trying to play adult without understanding the rules. That was the real danger. Not his weapon, but his panic. Untrained men with firearms make bad decisions when they feel their authority slipping. "I need you to step out of the car," he repeated, more forcefully now, the back of his neck flushed red. Ava's voice was calm, composed. "You're making a mistake. I'm not a threat. I am unarmed. My ID is valid. My parents live here. You're escalating something that doesn't need to be escalated." "You don't get to tell me how to do my job," he snapped. "Step. Outside. Now." She could see his hand trembling slightly as it hovered near the weapon. That was the tipping point. Ava glanced in her mirror. No police in sight. No backup coming to handle this professionally. Just one man with too much fear and not enough judgment. She had to act. He twitched. That's all it took. A shift in his balance, a subtle movement toward drawing the gun fully. Ava unlatched her seatbelt with her left hand, while her right slid across her thigh, prepared for a rapid exit. When he began to pull, she opened the door swiftly, stepped out, and closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, before his hand even cleared the holster. In one fluid motion, she seized his wrist with a grip honed by years of fieldwork, twisted it just enough to force compliance, and pinned his arm upward. The gun clattered to the pavement. He gasped in pain and shock, suddenly face to face with someone who had danced with real danger. "You're done," she said quietly. She shoved him backward, away from the weapon, and used her foot to slide it farther out of reach. He stumbled, wide-eyed and humiliated, now utterly unsure of what just happened. That's when she reached into her jacket, pulled out her badge, and flipped it open. "Commander Ava Moore, FBI Tactical Operations." A hush fell over the scene. A couple from a nearby driveway had been watching, frozen in place with their dog's leash dangling forgotten from their hand. A teenage boy on a bike stopped short at the corner, mouth open. The man's bravado melted into a pale, confused silence. Ava didn't need to yell. She never did. The truth was louder than any accusation. Ava stood her ground, the weight of her badge in her left hand, and the tension of the moment still buzzing in the air. The HOA officer, or whatever he fancied himself, was now crouched against the gate's retaining wall, clutching his wrist, trying to make sense of what just happened. His world had just turned upside down in under 10 seconds. One moment, he was in charge, weapon half drawn, ego fully inflated. The next, he was disarmed, outmaneuvered, and completely exposed for the pretender he was. She didn't gloat. That wasn't her style. She knelt calmly to secure the firearm, removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, and placed the parts separately on the pavement. Every movement was precise, practiced, procedural. She wasn't just making a point. She was establishing control, legally and tactically. Her training taught her that the calmest person in a crisis is usually the one you listen to. And right now, she was ice. The man began sputtering something about self-defense, about her being a threat, about how she lunged at him. Ava stood tall and said nothing. She just waited. And as if summoned by the gravity of the situation, 2 local police cruisers finally rolled up, lights flashing but sirens off. The gate had a camera. Someone inside must have seen what happened, or more likely, heard the screaming on the open intercom line. The first officer out of the car was a sergeant, mid-40s, who instantly recognized her. His entire demeanor changed the moment he saw the badge in her hand. Not just any badge, but a tactical operations commander's credentials. He'd clearly dealt with feds before, but maybe never one quite like Ava. "Commander Moore?" he asked cautiously. "Yes." The subject attempted to draw his weapon on me without cause. I neutralized the threat without injury and secured the firearm. I have video on my dash cam, and I've already called this into my field office. The sergeant nodded and turned to the flustered volunteer. "We'll take it from here." The man opened his mouth to protest, but the words came out as little more than excuses tangled in disbelief. Whatever story he thought he was going to tell had already unraveled. Ava stepped back, allowing the officers to take over. Her hands remained in plain sight. She answered every question with steady clarity. Not a hint of personal vengeance, just professional obligation. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed. Disappointed in the failure of judgment, the lack of accountability, the neighborhood's tolerance for this kind of unchecked behavior. When one of the officers asked if she wanted to press charges, she simply said, "Let the report speak for itself. My legal team will follow up." As the man was escorted into the back of a cruiser, his shoulders slumped and his eyes downcast, Ava finally turned toward the gate. She walked through it without a word, through the neighborhood that had just seen what real authority looked like. The illusion of control had been shattered, and she hadn't needed a gun to do it. The next morning, the HOA president knocked on our door. He had that tight smile people wear when they're pretending nothing's wrong, when the ground beneath their feet has cracked, but they're trying to keep walking like it hasn't. He stood on our porch with a clipboard in one hand and a branded HOA polo shirt stretched over his gut. His tone was smooth, almost rehearsed, like a politician stepping into damage control. He offered a weak apology for the incident at the gate, avoiding specifics, and called it a regrettable misunderstanding that had spiraled beyond protocol. I watched Ava lean against the kitchen doorway as I opened the door. She said nothing, just folded her arms and let the silence stretch. It was the kind of silence that made liars sweat. The president kept shifting his weight, glancing from me to Ava and back again, clearly hoping someone would speak first, maybe offer him a way out. He cleared his throat and added, "We, of course, take this very seriously. We're reviewing our guidelines and we'd be happy to cover any inconvenience this may have caused." "Inconvenience," Ava said finally, her voice low but sharp. "Your untrained volunteer pointed a loaded weapon at a federal officer. That's not an inconvenience. That's a felony." His face twitched. "Yes, well, we don't condone that sort of behavior. He's been relieved of his patrol duties, and we've suspended the entire neighborhood watch program until further notice." I could see what he was really trying to do: contain the fallout, avoid lawsuits, and most importantly, avoid bad press. The HOA had spent years crafting a reputation for order and civility, and now that image was one step away from being featured on the evening news. He offered to waive our HOA dues for the year and hinted at a mutual non-disclosure understanding, though he didn't dare say those exact words. Ava didn't blink. "This isn't about dues. This is about accountability." She handed him a business card with her office's legal liaison. Any further communication goes through them. He took it, eyes dimming. No more charm in his voice, no more spin in his step. He left without another word. As the door closed behind him, Ava looked at me and said, "That man still thinks this is about optics. He doesn't realize it's already out of his hands." She was right. The wheels of justice had begun to turn, and no HOA vote could stop them now. The neighborhood buzzed like a shaken beehive in the days that followed. Some tried to pretend nothing had happened, trimming hedges and waving politely, as if their carefully controlled world hadn't just cracked open. But others couldn't unsee it. The video leaked, not by Ava, but by someone who'd captured the aftermath on their phone, and it spread faster than the HOA could contain. There she was, calm and composed, stepping through the gate as the man who had threatened her was led away by police. No yelling, no panic, just power held with restraint. Whispers floated over backyard fences, at the mailbox, in the cul-de-sacs. "Did you see the video? She's FBI?" I never liked how aggressive those patrol guys were. People who had silently accepted the HOA's iron grip began to question it out loud. A retired teacher down the block left a typed letter in every neighbor's mailbox, asking for a special meeting to discuss the HOA's policies on volunteer enforcement. A single mum, who'd once been followed while jogging at dusk, stood up at that meeting and asked why she had to feel watched in her own neighborhood. Not everyone welcomed the change. A few residents grumbled about Ava's overreaction, as if disarming an armed man without injury was somehow theatrical. They clung to the illusion that the system was fine, that everything had been safe before someone made a scene. But for many others, Ava became a quiet symbol of what real accountability looked like. She didn't live there, but her actions sent ripples through every sidewalk and garden. For the first time in years, the fear had shifted. And it wasn't resting on the shoulders of the residents anymore. It was bearing down on those who'd abused their borrowed authority. Within 2 weeks, the HOA board was forced to hold a formal town hall, something they hadn't done in nearly a year. Folding chairs filled the community center, and for once, people showed up not for wine tastings or potlucks, but because they were angry, awake, and ready to ask questions that couldn't be dodged with polite language or petty fines. The air was thick with tension, and the quiet electricity of long-silenced voices finally ready to speak. No one clapped when the board took their seats. An internal investigation had already been launched, but by then it was too little, too late. The man who had drawn his weapon on Ava had been arrested and charged with aggravated assault, impersonation of a peace officer, and unlawful possession of a firearm on private security detail without certification. Turns out, he'd failed a real security licensing exam twice. He had no training, no background in law enforcement, just a walkie-talkie, a vest he bought online, and a permission slip from the HOA to roam the streets like a vigilante. Ava never showed up to the meeting. She didn't need to. Her presence was in every pointed question, every neighbor who stood up and said, "Enough." The board was grilled for hours, their justifications unraveling in real time. Homeowners demanded oversight, background checks, and the complete dismantling of the Neighborhood Watch Patrol. A petition for a special election to replace several board members gained hundreds of signatures before the night was over. In the weeks that followed, changes came fast. The patrol program was officially disbanded. A new security company, certified, licensed and monitored, was brought in. Training was mandated for anyone interacting with residents in any official capacity. And the bylaws were revised to prohibit armed volunteers from enforcing community rules under any circumstances. Neighbors who once felt powerless found their voices. Those who had feared retaliation realized they weren't alone. The HOA, once smug and unchecked, was now under the microscope. And through it all, Ava said nothing publicly. She didn't need recognition. Justice, to her, wasn't loud. It was lasting. The man with the gun lost more than his illusion of power. The neighborhood gained something far more valuable: clarity, courage, and a long overdue reckoning. Sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't lurking in the shadows. They're the ones who stand in plain sight with borrowed authority and no understanding of the weight it carries. That man at the gate wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He was a man who believed that a vest and a badge gave him the right to judge, to threaten, to escalate. And in this neighborhood, he wasn't alone. For too long, we allowed that illusion to stand, wrapped in the comforting lie of safety. We thought that silence kept the peace, that going along was easier than pushing back. But peace built on fear isn't peace at all. It's submission. What happened with Ava wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a spotlight, sharp and unforgiving, shining on a truth many of us had ignored. That power given without accountability can rot even the best of intentions. That defending your home doesn't mean letting paranoia turn your neighbor into a suspect. That safety is not about control. It's about trust, about community, about justice that protects everyone, not just the ones who fit a certain mold. Since that day, things haven't gone back to the way they were, and maybe they never should. There's more conversation now, more awareness. People think twice before dismissing concerns, before handing power to the loudest voice in the room. We still have work to do, and not everyone's convinced. But change is a process, not an event. Ava didn't come here to fight a battle. She came home for dinner. But when the battle came to her, she didn't flinch. She stood tall, acted wisely, and reminded us all of what real strength looks like. Not in fear, not in force, but in discipline, truth, and the quiet, unshakable demand that we all do better.